I am Alan Price, Director of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, and together with my colleague Rachel Floor, Director of the Kennedy Library Foundation, former Library Director Tom Putnam, who is also here today, and all our library and foundation colleagues, I am delighted to welcome all of you to this year's PEN Hemingway Award for Debut Novel Celebration. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and celebrating the work of the 2024 winners and honorees. It's a good moment to say, if you can silence your phones, that would be terrific. I would like to acknowledge all of those who make this event possible, including the generous underwriters of the Kennedy Library Forums, lead sponsors Bank of America, the Lowell Institute, and CVS Health, as well as the Mass Cultural Council, and our media sponsor, the Boston Globe, and the generous supporters who help sustain the Hemingway Collection and its programs, especially the Hemingway Family, Hemingway Limited, and our Hemingway Council and Friends of the Hemingway Collection members. We're very pleased to collaborate with the International Hemingway Foundation and Society in co-presenting this afternoon's celebration. As always, we are grateful to the Hemingway family for their continued support of our Hemingway programs, to PEN America for their work administering the award, and to the distinguished judges for the 2024 awards. We're thrilled to have members of the Hemingway family joining us here and watching online. And as always, we send our greetings and best wishes to Ernest Hemingway's son, Patrick. Patrick and his late and dearly missed wife, Carol, have long been the vanguard of support for the Ernest Hemingway Collection that resides here in the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. We are honored to be the world's largest repository for the writer's personal papers and photographs. For decades, Patrick's annual readings from his father's works at the PEN Hemingway ceremony were a real pleasure for us here at the library. In recent years, Dr. Seán Hemingway, the writer's grandson, and his wife, Dr. Colette Hemingway, have taken up this mantle, and together they co-chair the Hemingway Council, which raises funds for and awareness of the collection. Thank you for joining us today, Seán and Colette. And we are also delighted to welcome Patrick's grandson and Ernest Hemingway's great-grandson, Patrick Hemingway Adams, and his wife, Amy Adams. Thank you for being with us as well. President Kennedy admired Ernest Hemingway and his work, and even cited Hemingway's definition of courage as grace under pressure in the beginning of his own Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Profiles in Courage. And I will come back to that theme in a moment. And after Ernest Hemingway died in 1961, President Kennedy arranged for Mary Hemingway to return to Cuba to retrieve her late husband's belongings. And a few years later, she offered Hemingway's papers, photographs, and selected mementos to Jacqueline Kennedy for inclusion in President Kennedy's library. And as we strive to advance the Kennedy administration's legacy in honoring the arts and culture, we are grateful indeed for the opportunity to celebrate the work of this year's wonderful awardees. We are particularly honored to host this afternoon's program and create a public space to contemplate the beauty and power of the written word. Whenever I pick up the writings of Ernest Hemingway, something always pulls me into the work. I am transported to a place where the people make seemingly simple statements, and my mind tries to find all the hidden meanings and universal themes behind what is said and unsaid. The smallest of excerpts, I read to you 2 sentences from the Green Hills of Africa. All I wanted to do now was get back to Africa. We had not left it yet, but when I would wake in the night, I would lie, listening, homesick for it already. I just love that. I said I would come back to the correspondence relationship between Ernest Hemingway and President Kennedy, although at the time, not president yet. I read to you from a letter dated July 26th, 1955, to Mr. Ernest Hemingway, care of Charles Scribner's Sons in New York. Dear Mr. Hemingway, I am completing a book on political courage, the stories of senators who risked their careers by speaking out for principles which were extremely unpopular among their constituents. I am most anxious to use in the text a definition of courage as grace under pressure, which I recall was attributed to you. I am planning to open the book by quoting this definition and stating that the book contains the stories of the pressures operating on 8 courageous senators and the grace with which they endured these pressures. Unfortunately, I am unable to find the source of this quotation or verify your authorship of it. I wonder if you would recall the phrase and would be kind enough to let me know so I might use it in the manner suggested. Thank you in advance for your help in this matter. Sincerely, John F. Kennedy. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Seán and Colette Hemingway's daughter, Anouk Hemingway, who will introduce her father. Please join me in welcoming Anouk Hemingway.
My name is Anouk Hemingway, and I'm the great-granddaughter of Ernest Hemingway. It has been a privilege to attend this literary event since I was a young child. The works of authors like those we honor today have enriched my experience as a high school student. And with admiration, I'd like to introduce my father, Seán Hemingway.
Thank you, Anouk. There's been a long-standing tradition to give Ernest Hemingway a voice at this event, and it is my honor to read to you now from his short story, The 3-Day Blow. I chose this reading to honor my Aunt Carol Hemingway, who died recently. She was a great lady who loved this event. The 3-Day Blow was her favorite Hemingway short story. My grandfather wrote the story in Paris in 1925. It is set in Upper Michigan, in the region where he grew up. It is hard to excerpt from my grandfather's writing because it is so tight and carefully crafted, but to keep my reading to 6 minutes, I'm going to read from the beginning and then the end of the story. The 3-Day Blow. The road came out of the orchard onto the top of the hill. There was the cottage, the porch bare, smoke coming from the chimney. In back was the garage, the chicken coop, and the second-growth timber like a hedge against the woods behind. The big trees swayed far over in the wind as he watched. It was the first of the autumn storms. As Nick crossed the open field above the orchard, the door of the cottage opened and Bill came out. He stood on the porch looking out. "Well, Wemmage," he said. "Hey, Bill," Nick said, coming up the steps. They stood together, looking out across the country, down over the orchard, beyond the road, across the lower fields, and the woods of the point to the lake. The wind was blowing straight down the lake. They could see the surf along 10 Mile Point. "She's blowing," Nick said. "She'll blow like that for 3 days," Bill said. "Is your dad in?" Nick said. "No, he's out with the gun. Come on in." Nick went inside the cottage. There was a big fire in the fireplace. The wind made it roar. Bill shut the door. "Have a drink," he said. He went out to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses and a pitcher of water. Nick reached the whiskey bottle from the shelf above the fireplace. Now, after they've been drinking for a while, the subject of Nick's recent breakup with his girlfriend Marge comes up. "All of a sudden, everything was over," Nick said. "I don't know why it was. I couldn't help it. Just like when the 3-day blows come now and rip all the leaves off the trees." "Well, it's over, that's the point," Bill said. "It was my fault," Nick said. "It doesn't make any difference whose fault it was," Bill said. "No, I suppose not," Nick said. The big thing was that Marjorie was gone, and that he would probably never see her again. He had talked to her about how they would go to Italy together and the fun they would have, places they would be together. It was all gone now. "So long as it's over, that's all that matters," Bill said. "I tell you, Wemmage, I was worried while it was going on. You played it right. I understand her mother is sore as hell. She told a lot of people you were engaged. We weren't engaged, Nick said. It was all around that you were. I can't help it, Nick said. We weren't. Weren't you going to get married, Bill asked. Yes, but we weren't engaged, Nick said. What's the difference? Bill asked judicially. I don't know. There's a difference. I don't see it, said Bill. All right, said Nick. Let's get drunk. All right, Bill said. Let's get really drunk. Let's get drunk and then go swimming, Nick said. He drank off his glass. I'm sorry as hell about her, but what could I do, he said. You know what her mother was like. She was terrible, Bill said. All of a sudden it was over, Nick said. I oughtn't to talk about it. You aren't, Bill said. I talked about it, now I'm through. We won't ever speak about it again. You don't want to think about it. You might get back into it again. Nick had not thought about that. It had seemed so absolute. That was a thought. It made him feel better. Sure, he said, there's always that danger. He felt happy now. There was not anything that was irrevocable. He might go into town Saturday night. Today was Thursday. There's always a chance, he said. You'll have to watch yourself, Bill said. I'll watch myself, he said. He felt happy. Nothing was finished. Nothing was ever lost. He would go into town on Saturday. He felt lighter, as he had felt before Bill started to talk about it. There was always a way out. Let's take the guns and go down to the point and look for your dad, Nick said. All right. Bill took down the 2 shotguns from the rack on the wall. He opened a box of shells. Nick put on his Mackinac coat and his shoes. His shoes were stiff from the drying. He was still quite drunk, but his head was clear. How do you feel? Nick asked. Swell, I've just got a good edge on. Bill was buttoning his sweater. There's no use getting drunk. No, we ought to get outdoors. They stepped out the door. The wind was blowing a gale. The birds will lie right down in the grass with this, Nick said. They struck down toward the orchard. I saw a woodcock this morning, Bill said. Maybe we'll jump him, Nick said. You can't shoot in this wind, Bill said. Outside now, the Marge business was no longer so tragic. It was not even very important. The wind blew everything like that away. It's coming right off the big lake, Nick said. Against the wind, they heard the thud of a shotgun. That's Dad, Bill said. He's down in the swamp. Let's cut down that way, Nick said. Let's cut across the lower meadow and see if we jump anything, Bill said. All right, Nick said. None of it was important now. The wind blew it out of his head. Still, he could always go into town Saturday night. It was a good thing to have in reserve. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that reading, Dr. Hemingway. I love that story, and I see that landscape so clearly in my head when you read that. It's landscape I know well. Good afternoon. My name's Carl Eby, and I'm the president of the Ernest Hemingway Foundation and Society. The Hemingway Foundation was established in 1965 by Mary Hemingway, Ernest's widow, for the purpose of awakening, sustaining an interest in, promoting, fostering, stimulating, supporting, improving, and developing literature. The Foundation and Society is proud to promote scholarship devoted to the life and work of Ernest Hemingway, and it's proud to support and promote new voices in contemporary American fiction. As part of that mission, I'm honored to be here to celebrate the Hemingway Award, which each year honors a debut novel of exceptional merit by an American author. For their extraordinary work, I'm delighted to congratulate this year's winner, Javier Fuentes, and this year's finalists, Jinwoo Chong and Maya Jeffra. I'm grateful also for this opportunity to thank the Hemingway family, the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, in particular Liz Murphy, forum producer, and Hillary Justice, Hemingway Scholar in Residence, the UCross Foundation, and PEN America
for everything they do to support this award, Hemingway's legacy, and American literature. I want to thank Joan Silber for her beautiful and powerful writing. In the middle of one of her novels right now and thoroughly enjoying it, and for agreeing to deliver today's keynote address. And many thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us here today. Finally, I want to extend our deepest thanks to this year's award judges, Charlie Vasquez, Elizabeth Crane, and Clevis Natera. Distinguished writers all, they've generously dedicated their time and energy to the task of reading the many incredible and diverse debut novels that were published last year. We're so glad that Charlie Vasquez is here with us today to help us celebrate this year's outstanding honorees. Thank you, Charlie, for your work and for sharing your thoughts on what you and your panel admired about this year's finalists. It's now my great honor to introduce this year's finalists for the PEN Hemingway Award. First, I am delighted to introduce Jinwoo Chong, author of Flux. Speaking for the judges, Charlie Vasquez notes that they loved this unique story, which fuses genres such as speculative fiction, crime noir, and thrillers, while exploring the tender inner worlds of characters haunted by grief in a reality shaped by technocratic greed and corruption. Please join me in welcoming Jinwoo Chong.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be the first person reading. That's always fun. Thank you to the John F. Kennedy Library and the Hemingway Foundation and the Hemingway family, and Javi and Maya and Charlie. Thank you for being here. I'm going to read just a little bit of Flux, the end of the third chapter, and what you should know is that there's a little boy named Bo who is grieving the loss of his mother and is obsessed with a television show. All right. Lights appear over Jacket Guy's shoulder. Cars pull in beside his unmarked sedan, blaring their sirens. He gets to his feet. The camera lingers on his back as he shakes the cold from his limbs, casts one last glance over the icy water, and heads for the headlights. Credits roll against his back. And it is not just the heavy shadows and swelling music just before cut to black that always fills this viewer's eyes with tears, but a darkness that takes on new meaning and will continue to do so for the rest of his life upon watching this episode. Because it is the last episode this viewer watched before his mother was killed and his family had broken. For years, he cannot bear to see it again and will not picture the fiery whiteness of Jiao Long's face flecked with snow and slush on the docks without thinking of the day it happened. It will be observed in the months afterward and in the years to follow that Jacket Guy is not only ionized pixels on a glass screen, but an extension of this viewer's courage, or rather, the courage he wishes he had, courage to speak, to keep living, to ask his father for a hug, for permission to cry that night in his bed while his brother sleeps, unaware that his mother lies cold in a fridge downtown, for one last night in which they might pretend none of it has happened at all, that they could take their dinners to the couch and slide the right tape into the player just under the television, take up the remote, press play with a click. But Hal only leaned close and kissed Bo on the forehead and was gone a second later. "Good night. I love you," was all he said. Bo felt the mattress under them shift again as his father lifted himself off it and made his way to the bedroom door, shutting it behind him. Beau lay back down against his pillow, straining to hear more, and then he gave up. He didn't want to sleep. Inside his chest buzzed, vibrations that reached the tips of his fingers and toes. It was so dark that it made no difference if he closed his eyes. He thought maybe he could exist like this forever. He thought of the snow, the way it gathered in clumps on the car windows as they drove home without her. And then his ears prickled when he heard the floor creaking in the hallway. He sat up again, wondering, but the door didn't open. The house made its noises, and they were small whispers as wind passed through the walls and the heater clattered to life in the crawl space, and nothing more. He sat up, waiting, and found he couldn't distinguish the howl of the wind from his little breaths. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jinwoo. Okay, now I'm delighted to introduce Maya Jeffra, author of American Gospel. The judges loved the way this richly symbolic and densely Gothic novel juxtaposed and wove together the voices of its three diverse narrators through the place that connects them, a low-income neighborhood in Baltimore slated to be replaced by an amusement park. Please join me in welcoming Maya Jeffra.
Thanks for being here, you all. So I'm just going to read some excerpts from the prologue. So go right to the inciting incident. Nothing needed to be known, because certainly the characters didn't know. February. These men will not matter in the end, but the story begins with them, in a boardroom, in a hush. They all knew it was a hush because they could hear it, the audible pause and wait, the music rest, the preparation for the pounding notes of new decision. Between them all, on the 16th floor of a glass building towering over Baltimore's inner harbor, white pages gleamed from the table. McAllister, the developer, relished in the cleanliness of the contract, the crisp, bold serif font, the fine paper, the flush lines of black to white. 126 pages of gleaming white. The rest were admiring the catch, aware they looked like idiots in their hovering. But they didn't want to miss this moment either, wanted to take a photograph with their mind's eye, document the time when they participated in something out of the ordinary, part of something that would fill their names into ledgers to be read, newspapers, legacy. They would Google themselves, and this moment would be the first item listed on the pulsing screen. The keywords: deal, real estate, revitalization, urban renaissance, and perhaps Baltimore. Beyond the meeting room on the 16th floor, dark wood table, gray and burgundy accents, the city was well in movement. Buses screeched their wheels, cars blared with impatience, harbor taxis clanged their bells, lipped against the loading dock. Hotels clicked cold asphalt. Volume determinant of ambition. Names called out across screens into the wind. All the sound colluded in its rise high above the inner harbor until it could be mistaken for the ocean, a shore of concrete, brick, and glass, one edge of the world. Steam hissed out of the potholes, synchronized white plumes dynamizing Charles Street, Light Street, Pratt Street, the pillowy display above revealing nothing of the seething below, in the gray and brown belly of Baltimore. The men in the boardroom, however, heard none of these sounds, or perhaps heard selected sounds. The ding of elevator doors closing to rise, the snap of briefcases when emptied, the ka-ching of cash registers. All very resolute sounds that signify the endings of things for most and the beginnings of things for them. McAllister wondered which of them would be the first to question the project once the afterglow faded. He wished he had an instrument that could bore into the solid knot of their gut, examine how tight it really was, where there was chance for fray. For now, though, the men were solid, pumped, the swell of impending success anchoring their movements. This is big. The neighborhood will clean up. It's going to be like Six Flags. This is obviously my old white man voice, sorry. A Baltimore-themed park, a better version of itself. So clever. New jobs. At that moment in Highlandtown, where the theme park's grand entrance would be, a gaggle of squirmy seventh graders were learning fractions in their King Middle School classroom. At that moment in Highlandtown, the spot designated for the Star-Spangled Music Hall was a plague of seagulls tearing apart a grease-soaked paper bag in a Roy Rogers parking lot. At that moment in Highlandtown, on the same block that Crabtown's signature roller coaster would be erected, a small young woman was being beaten to death by her tweaked-out boyfriend, her baby daddy. 28 blows, 4 of them to the head. She had hid his glass pipe under the sink as a loving suggestion. The screams that emanated from the dilapidated row house could have been the sound of a thrill ride, long and looping, sharp and falling, the low moans of the finish. McAllister's shirt fluttered, as if he could sense the crime, could sense the life exhale from the woman's body. But change does that, a fluttering. He continued to smile and shake. He knew there was good in what he was doing, felt it in his fingers. He was cleaning up the city. Crabtown would help bring people back to the Baltimore he loved, the only way that was certain. Look at what South Street Seaport did for Manhattan. And Disney World, it made a whole city from scratch. So why did he feel like he was falling, as if the window glass he leaned against suddenly dissolved in the salty air? He put his hands in his pockets, rocked on his heels, and smiled. His gaze fixed back on the conference table, the contract, neatly wrapped in velo binder, something that made sense to these men. They caught his gaze, and they all followed it, and nodded almost imperceptibly, like a secret had passed among them. That ended the meeting. Moving forward, they grabbed for their coats, started to bundle up against the city outside, even smaller talk now, the weather kind, all of them stealing quick glances at McAllister to make sure of something, all looking for the same word. "Gentlemen," he said, and they all felt better. Their story ends here at the beginning. This is common. The rich begin the story, and the poor bring up the rear. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks so much, Maya. All right. Now, to introduce this year's winner of the PEN Hemingway Award, I'm delighted to introduce one of this year's judges, Charlie Vasquez. Artist, writer, and musician, New York Foundation for the Arts and NEA Fellow, Charlie is the author, among other things, of the novel Buzz in Israel and the novel Contraband, and the story collection Phantasmas, Puerto Rican Tales of the Dead. Charlie's the editor of Fire King Press. He's a teaching artist for PEN America's Dreaming Out Loud Free Writers Workshop series for immigrant writers. And in 2014, he was awarded a commendation from the City of New York for his contributions to Latino literary heritage. Please join me in welcoming Charlie Vasquez.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming out today. Good afternoon, I'm Charlie Vasquez, as you may have heard. One of the 3 judges who were faced with the daunting task of reading through the best fiction being produced in American letters today and deciding on a winner. But they were all winners. They were all winners. As a queer working-class Puerto Rican writer, I gravitate towards stories that feature characters who live marginalized existences, not by their choosing necessarily, but due to external forces like racism, homophobia, immigration status, and so forth. These are themes that surface in the stories written by my undocumented students at PEN America's Dreaming Out Loud. for which I've served as a teaching artist for 6 or 7 years now. And this year's winner is Countries of Origin by Javier Fuentes. And this is just a brief citation to sort of give you a synopsis of what the novel's about that we came up with as a trio of judges. Countries of Origin is a moving story about a young undocumented man who's lived in the United States since his childhood. Through his story, we experience what it means to live in a state of suspension, in fear of taking a wrong step that could lead to expulsion from the only country our protagonist, Demetrio, has ever known as home. A series of events leads him back to Spain, his country of birth, where Demetrio is once again forced to reflect on what it means to be from a place while existing outside of it. We watch as he falls in love with the wealthy and charismatic Jacobo, which complicates the urgency of finding his own place in the world. There's a great deal of care and tenderness in Fuentes' telling of the story from that point onward. The narrative insists that we consider class, belonging, borders, legacies, and love in the construction of the self. It's a novel that brims with hope and love. So I introduce to you all Javier Fuentes. Congratulations.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for those kind words. Thank you all for coming. While I have the light, I don't see anybody. I'm there in life. What you need to know here is this passage takes place right after Demetrio has confessed his undocumented status to Chef, who he's been working for about 10 years. It was 4 a.m. when I left Chef's apartment after agreeing to meet an immigration lawyer, a friend who had helped him with his own naturalization process. I was surprised to learn that Chef had become American, seeing how often he looked for opportunities to unfavorably compare the United States with France. Thinking about my past and reliving moments that I rarely revisited had me feeling wired. I opened the door of the building, and stepping into a soundless city covered in snow, I decided to walk home. The streets were so desolate that for the first time in a while, I was able to hear my thoughts. With snow up to my knees and a harsh, stinking wind, I crossed Park Avenue, looking at the yellow light of a taxi that had risked one last ride and was now stuck in the middle of the road. Extreme winter storms only came every few years, but that night, in the midst of this apocalyptic sight, I realized that I enjoyed the city most when it was paralyzed. It took me 3 hours to make it back to the meatpacking district, where I had been living for years. I remember bicycling as a kid through the meandering cobblestone streets, when it was a neighborhood of people living on the margins, their existence doomed to long nights in dark, inhospitable alleys, on decaying piers, or in reeking bars. When artists squatted in abandoned buildings, turning walls into art that years later would be shown at the Whitney, runaway soldiers' youth and junkies sold what they could. By the time I got home, the early morning light revealed a Carrara marble sky. The facade of my building was covered in graffiti again. As I pushed open the heavy metal door, a cold chill traveling down my back made me run the 5 flights of stairs. My apartment, with its high ceilings and massive windows, gave the illusion of being outside, and on nights like this, it was almost magical. I took great pride in having a rent-stabilized place because it was an earned right, proof that one had stuck around during the tough times when nobody had wanted to live in this neighborhood. After peeling off my wet socks, I poured myself a glass of water. A blinking red light across the room signaled a message from Choose, the only person I knew who insisted on using landlines and answering machines. Choose was my uncle, my mother, and my father. Mama, unable to provide for me, had sent me to live with him when I turned 8 years old. He had been in New York since 1967 after fleeing fascist Spain, when his name appeared on a list of students organizing against Franco. Chus walked to the Pyrenees into France, spent time in a Paris commune with other Spanish exiles, and then made his way to New York. He took an active role in the civil rights movement and belonged to the Socialist Party of America. Chus believed in free love, so almost every morning growing up, I shared my frosted flakes with a different man. He had lived in the same rundown tenement on Avenue C for more than 2 decades. Most of our neighbors, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and Colombians, have begun retreating to Spanish Harlem, Sunset Park, and Corona. He was one of the few who remained. I glanced at the blinking light, his gentle voice boxed in, wanting to be released. I did not want to hear any words other than, "We'll get you the right papers." Having already met with an immigration lawyer once, I knew there was little to nothing that could be done to regularize my immigration status. But that morning, lying down in bed, the snow gently landing on the windows, blurring the lights across the street, I pretended otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Let's all have one more round of applause for this year's honorees and winners. And I'd like to send a personal greeting, a greeting from myself, from all of us, to Patrick Hemingway, who is watching by live stream. And I want to say also that Carol is in our hearts and in our memories today. And we appreciate so much everything she did, everything you've both done for the Hemingway collection and for Hemingway's legacy. It's now my great privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Joan Silber. Joan Silber was raised in New Jersey and received her BA from Sarah Lawrence College. Oh, by the way, if you've got your program and you were looking there, you were expecting Hillary Justice. Hillary was not able to make it at the last minute, and that's why I'm substituting. I thought I might say something about that. Anyways. Back to Joan. So Joan was raised in New Jersey and received her BA from Sarah Lawrence College, where she studied writing with Grace Paley. She moved to New York after college and has made it her home ever since. She holds an MA from New York University. She's written 9 books of fiction. Her newest, Secrets of Happiness, is out in May 2021 in the US and in July 2021 in the UK. It's marvelous, I'm reading it. Her last novel, Improvement, won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction and the PEN/Faulkner Award. She also received the PEN/Malmet Award for Excellence in the Short Story. Her other works of fiction include Fools, longlisted for the National Book Award and finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Award. The Size of the World, finalist for the Los Angeles Times Prize in Fiction, and Ideas of Heaven, finalist for the National Book Award and the Story Prize. She's also written Lucky Us, In My Other Life, and In the City. Her first book, Household Words, won the PEN/Hemingway Award, and it's part of the legacy of this award. She's the author of The Art of Time in Fiction, a study of how various writers have used time. Her short fiction has been chosen for the O. Henry Prize, Best American Short Stories, and the Pushcart Prize. Stories have appeared in Tin House, the Southern Review, Plowshares, The New Yorker, the Paris Review, and many other magazines. She's been the recipient of an Academy Award in Literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and grants from the National Endowment for the Arts and the New York Foundation for the Arts. Joan taught fiction writing at Sarah Lawrence College for many years and teaches in the Warren Wilson College MFA program. She's also taught at Boston University, the 92nd Street Y, the University of Utah, and New York University. Her summer teaching has included conferences at Napa Valley, Breadloaf, Indiana University, Manhattanville College, Stone Coast, Aspen, and Sarah Lawrence College. Please join me in welcoming Joan Silber.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me? Is the mic good? Okay. Okay, maybe that's is that good? Okay. I was so excited when they asked me to be the keynote speaker for this event because I remember so clearly how important the award was to me many decades ago. I'm honored to be here congratulating the winner, Javier Fuentes, on his debut novel, Countries of Origin, and the finalists Jinwoo Chong on his novel Flux, and Maya Jeffra on his novel American Gospel. I had no way of knowing this event would happen in the midst of great upheaval in PEN America, and I'm going to begin by just reading two sentences that were in the October 25th statement by International PEN, and they are, PEN International is horrified by the mounting toll of civilian casualties and the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. The organization calls for an immediate ceasefire, the protection of civilians, including the release of all hostages, and an end of the siege imposed on Gaza. We remain horrified, and much consternation has ensued from PEN America not issuing a similar statement until much later. You're not here to hear my views on the Israeli-Hamas war, and you'll be glad to know you will not. Recently, I've been thinking, in light of all of this and everything else that's happening today, of the ominous resemblance this current time has to the late 1930s, with the rise of fascism on many fronts and the separate escalating wars all over the globe. I've been thinking about W.H. Auden and the poems he wrote in 1939, which I've known all my life. Here's a few lines from one of them. In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. That bit of red alert is from his poem in memory of W.B. Yeats. It's also the poem that has the famous line, "For poetry makes nothing happen," a line that I think is often cited with meanings that are much less than what Auden meant. Here's more of that verse from Auden, addressed to the dead Yeats, who was both a public figure and a lyric poet. Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. Now Ireland has her madness and her weather still. For poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper. Flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs. Raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives, there's a comma here, a way of happening, a mouth. So Auden did say that what writers write is a way of happening. Auden's other famous poem of that year, September 1st, 1939, is more vocal about the despair and more adamant in the vow to undo the folded lie. But I had wanted to begin this speech by talking about joy. Few joys are greater than that of an author who's getting praise for a first book. I remember after hearing about the Hemingway, all those years ago. The phrase I kept saying to people was, "It means I'm not crazy." And Auden, of course, talks about the poet persuading us to rejoice. What a volatile and risky thing the writer's relationship to the world is, one that is never settled and changes constantly over the long years of a life. World is, of course, a vague word with multiple meanings. It can mean the nightmarish world of the news. It can mean outer versus inner, or the market versus the realm of ideas. When I was a college writing student, I had the great good fortune, as you've just heard, to study with Grace Paley. Grace was an extraordinary short story writer who published just 3 books of stories in her life. And she always told us that a story could take years to write, and it was a writer's job to let it do that. For many years, I was secretly mad at Grace for not having pushed me to be more productive. Other people had gone to programs that emphasized strict schedules and work count. Why had nobody told me? I do feel differently about all that now. What Grace tried to convey to us, her acolytes, was a more exacting labor. In her casual way, she taught us honor. I've had a long, zigzagging career in which I've had a number of different angles to contemplate this from. My first book did great. It won this thing called the Hemingway. My second book had a more underwhelmed response. And there was a period of 13 years before I could get my third book published. I call it my 13 years in the desert. So what did I do then? I did a number of things to distract myself. I considered giving up writing, but it was sort of like saying, I'm going to go eat worms. It wasn't a freeing notion. And I considered giving up the teaching of writing. I had the perfectly good idea that I might learn American Sign Language and work as an interpreter. They always look so great. And I did take an ASL class, and I was terrible. I was the worst one in the whole class. I'm not very visual. My better idea as a way to get out of myself was to volunteer. And I was a buddy for Gay Men's Health Crisis, which meant you showed up once a week to be of help to a person with AIDS. This was in the 90s, when AIDS was a death sentence and very much a raging epidemic. And I ended up doing that for 17 years. It did cast my own problems in another light. And I developed an interest in Buddhism, which also helped me get out of myself. And I think I got to be a better writer during those years. The work gradually got larger in ways I had always wanted. And I had come to this through being so long in a realm very much outside the realm of writing. We live in our own times. I came of age when there was a widespread belief that any fiction that was overtly political was tacky. We've outgrown that idea as we've outgrown any number of prevailing ideas that I won't bother to list for you. One excellent thing about living a long time is that you see many theories come and go. Every era has its own assumptions, and they're never enough. Life is always more complicated than that. One of the beauties of fiction, in my opinion, and it's not original with me, is that stories serve to remind us that other people have interior lives. Even hateful people, or those we call unsympathetic. Fiction writers, whatever kind of fiction they write, are using characters and have the task of making us believe we can enter consciousnesses other than our own. Fiction embodies the seemingly obvious but never quite believable notion that other people are real. Being reminded of this isn't everything, but no sense of justice can exist without it. This is why we think people who don't read are shallower, and we have some reasons for this prejudice. And I love it that the forms of fiction are changing all the time now. The ways of being shaken out of the unfolded lie are ever more various, ever more widely and fully imagined. I don't mean to sound as if I think all fiction is wonderful. You can all guess how I go on about the examples I find false and misleading and tacky. But I love with all my heart the potential of fiction, its capacities to expand by powers of imagination our narrow visions, our insufficient views of the world. This struggle against insufficient views is always enacted under the shadow of history. It's always complicated. And we have seen all too well throughout the past and in our own times the horror that grows out of insufficient views and narrow visions. I would like to point out that while we're here thinking about the labor of writing, that whatever else is going on, the trait required of every writer is great stubbornness. You have to want to do it, and you have to try to do it with utter sincerity. One of my own favorite quotes from Ernest Hemingway, which I always used to cite to students, is, "There is nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed." So we are here to applaud the stubbornness and talent of the writers of these extraordinary first novels, to wish them brilliant futures in this troubled and troublesome world as it is and will be, and to remind all of us how much we need them.
Thank you for that inspiration, that encouragement, and finally, an acknowledgement that my wife's accusing me of being stubborn could actually have a positive connotation. Once again, a round of applause for all of our finalists, nominees, and our speaker. Thank you to the Hemingway family for being with us, either in person or online. I would also like to thank Liz Murphy and the Education Department for having put this event together so splendidly. I'd like to thank all of you for being with us this afternoon, and my challenge to you is to go forth and write something. Have a wonderful day. Oh. And of course, you're invited to our reception in the pavilion. Lead the way.